A waiter stepped in front of Bud Spencer and shut him down on the spot. No warning, no explanation, just one cold reason. You don't belong here. Faded jeans, a wrinkled t-shirt, worn boots. That was enough. The owner took one look and threw him out. Bud didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He just smiled and walked away. But 10 minutes later, he came back, and what he did next brought the entire restaurant to silence. There was a restaurant in Rome called Bellacosta. Most people had never heard of it, and that was exactly how the owner liked it. Tucked along a quiet, elegant street not far from the historic center, Bellacosta did not advertise. It never needed to. Crisp white linens, candlelight glowing through hand-blown glass, low jazz drifting from concealed speakers, heavy silverware that seemed designed to remind you, without saying a word, that you were somewhere expensive. A typical meal cost around €250 a person before the wine, and nobody there considered that unusual. On a mild afternoon in early autumn, during that hushed stretch between lunch service and the first evening reservations, a large man came through the front door with 3 friends. His jeans were faded at the knees, the blue worn almost to grey. His black t-shirt was plain, slightly rumpled, untucked. His old boots looked like they had walked through years of roads, movie sets, and real life. No watch meant to impress. No jewelry calling attention to itself. Nothing that announced money, rank, or fame. That man was Bud Spencer. His friends were dressed much the same way, relaxed and ordinary. They had no reservation. They simply chose a quiet table near the window and sat down. Bud leaned back and watched the afternoon light move through the trees outside. One of his friends made a joke. Bud threw his head back and laughed. That warm, open laugh people knew from interviews and old television appearances. It was supposed to be nothing more than lunch among friends, good food, perhaps a glass of wine, the kind of small afternoon that vanishes from memory the moment it is over. But something else was about to happen. A waiter approached the table. He looked young, maybe 24, his hair neatly combed, his white shirt pressed perfectly. His name tag said Max. He carried 4 leather-bound menus against his chest, but he did not hand them over. He just stood there, shifting his weight, jaw tight, eyes flicking between Bud and the back of the room. Bud noticed immediately. He had spent a lifetime learning how to read people. "Good afternoon," Bud said, calm and kind. The way he spoke to everyone. "We're hungry. Could we see the menus and maybe start with some water?" Max swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, and his voice broke on the apology. "We're not able to serve your table today." The conversation at the table stopped. "Not able to serve us?" Bud repeated. He did not sound offended. He sounded curious. "The owner asked me to inform you that your party does not meet the standards of this establishment," the waiter said. "You are not dressed appropriately for this restaurant. I'm very sorry." Silence fell, the kind that presses against the ear. One of Bud's friends leaned forward. "Not dressed appropriately? We came here to eat lunch, not audition for a private club." Bud lifted one hand gently. Then he looked at Max, really looked at him, and understood what was written all over the young man's face. This had not been his choice. He had been sent to deliver a message he clearly hated giving. "It's all right," Bud said quietly. "This isn't your fault. You're doing what you were told." He pushed back his chair, stood up, and tugged once at his wrinkled shirt, which of course did nothing to make it look less wrinkled. "Come on, boys," he said. "Let's go." One of his friends stared at him. "You can't be serious. You're just leaving?" "They asked us to leave," Bud answered. "So, we're leaving. No shouting, no scene. No wounded pride on display." He held the door open for his friends, stepped out into the golden Roman afternoon, and let the restaurant door close behind him as softly as it had opened. In the parking area outside, his friends were much less composed. "That man just threw you out of his restaurant," one of them said, "because of your clothes. Are you really going to let that pass?" Bud leaned against his car and looked at the entrance to Bellacosta for a few quiet seconds. He said nothing. Then he smiled. It was not the smile of an angry man. It was the smile of someone who had already made up his mind and felt perfectly settled about it. "I'm not letting it pass," he said. "I'm just going to deal with it the right way. Give me 10 minutes. He took out his phone and made a single call. He spoke for less than 2 minutes, keeping his back turned so the others could not hear. "What was that?" one friend asked. "I invited someone to lunch," Bud replied. His friends knew that expression. Calm, certain, patient. When Bud Spencer smiled like that, something was coming that nobody else had seen yet. To understand what happened next, you had to understand who Vittorio De Luca really was, and why a man in faded jeans unsettled him so deeply. Vittorio was 52. His silver hair was combed back with exacting care. His shirts were custom-made and monogrammed at the cuff. His Italian leather shoes were polished every Sunday evening. A Rolex Submariner gleamed on his left wrist, always visible in a handshake. Every detail about him declared the same thing. I have arrived. But it had not begun that way. He had grown up above a small laundry in a working-class district outside Rome. His father drove a delivery van. His mother cleaned apartments in neighborhoods she could never have imagined living in. Vittorio wore clothes handed down by cousins, ate subsidized school lunches, and spent summers bussing tables at a roadside trattoria. He knew what it was like to enter an elegant shop and feel the staff watching him as if he might steal something. He knew the look people gave when you stepped out of an old car and walked toward a place that had already decided you did not belong. No words were needed. The humiliation arrived all the same. He swore he would never feel that again. At 34, he opened Bellacosta. At first, it was small. A narrow storefront, 8 tables, paper napkins. Over 18 years, he transformed it into one of the most respected restaurants in Rome. He hired a celebrated chef, built a remarkable wine cellar, attracted judges, television personalities, fashion executives, politicians. Bellacosta became evidence, proof that the poor boy from above the laundry had built a place where important people came to be seen. But somewhere in that climb, something inside him hardened. It was no longer enough to be successful. He needed distance from the life he came from. And the way he preserved that distance was by deciding who was worthy to sit in his dining room. There was no written dress code at the door. But the staff understood the rule. Shorts, trainers, wrinkled shirts. Anyone who looked too casual, too ordinary, too close to the world Vittorio had spent his whole life escaping, was quietly turned away. A young couple in sandals, a family with children and stained clothes, an elderly man in a worn jacket who came alone on his birthday just hoping for a nice meal. Vittorio refused them all. He told himself he was protecting the image of the restaurant. He never stopped to consider that he was doing to strangers exactly what had once been done to him. But Bud Spencer was not turned away only because of his clothes. The wound went deeper than that. Years earlier, a powerful investor named Elena Marconi had been considering backing Vittorio's expansion. She was one of the most influential names in Italy's restaurant world. Her support meant money, prestige, access, the chance to turn one acclaimed restaurant into a serious brand. Vittorio spent nearly a year courting her. Business plans, projections, private dinners, endless attention to detail. Elena told him she was seriously interested. Then came a charity gala in Rome, benefiting homeless children and struggling families. Elena attended. Bud Spencer was the guest of honor. But Bud did not stand at a podium and perform generosity. He sat with the children. He asked them about school, about football, about the films they loved. He spoke about the years when money had been tight, when the future had seemed uncertain. He stayed for hours. He remembered names. When a little girl asked whether he was really a movie star, Bud smiled and said, "Some days people say so, Other days, I'm just a big man trying to understand life like everyone else. Elena watched from across the room. Later, she told people that many famous guests treated charity events like public relations. Bud treated that evening as if it mattered, and because of that, she redirected her investment. Instead of financing Vittorio's luxury expansion, she put her money into a non-profit meal program for poor families across Rome. Something Bud had quietly supported for years. She called Vittorio one Tuesday evening. He remembered that it was Tuesday because he had just finished polishing his shoes. She was polite. She praised what he had built, but she had chosen a different direction. After the call ended, Vittorio sat alone in his office for nearly an hour. A year of work gone, not because he had failed in any visible way, but because a man in a t-shirt had sat with children, been real, and moved a wealthy woman to send her money somewhere else. It was irrational, but Vittorio blamed Bud. Bud Spencer had never heard of him. He had no idea an investor was debating a restaurant deal. He had shown up at that event because he cared about children who had less than they deserved. That was all. But for 4 years, Vittorio carried the resentment. Every newspaper story about Bud's kindness made his jaw tighten. Every account of his generosity irritated him more. He told himself it had to be an act, because if it was genuine, then all the polished surfaces, all the controlled elegance, all the image management Vittorio had built were still less powerful than one honest man in old boots. So when Bud Spencer walked into Bellacosta that Thursday wearing the exact kind of clothing Vittorio had spent a lifetime running from, years of bitterness rose in him at once. He called Max over. Table by the window. 4 men. Tell them we cannot serve them. Be respectful, but make sure they leave. Sir, I think one of them may be... I don't care who he is, Vittorio snapped. My restaurant. My rules. Go. Max went because he was 24 and needed his job, and had not yet learned that some instructions should never be obeyed. The call Bud made outside was to Lorenzo Conti, an old friend and a veteran producer who had known him for more than 20 years. Lorenzo was also one of Bellacosta's most valuable clients. For years he had hosted business dinners there and sent influential guests through its doors. Lorenzo, I'm at Bellacosta, Bud said. They turned me away because of what I'm wearing. I'm going back in. Feel like having lunch? A pause. I'll be there in 10. He arrived in 8. Dark sedan. Fine suit. The sort of guest Vittorio would welcome before the door had fully opened. Lorenzo stepped out smiling. You got thrown out of a restaurant? You? Bud Spencer? For wearing a t-shirt? That's the story, Bud said. Then let's go eat. The 5 men walked back in together, Lorenzo in tailoring, Bud in the same jeans and boots. The dining room was busier now, perhaps 35 or 40 people. Max saw them first, and all the color drained from his face. Vittorio stood behind the reception stand. He began his usual polished greeting before looking up. Good afternoon. Welcome to Bellacosta. Do you have a reza? He saw Lorenzo first, and a smile began to form. Then he saw Bud beside him. Same jeans, same shirt. Same man he had sent away less than an hour earlier. His face locked. Table for 5, please, Lorenzo said. You could almost see the calculation moving behind Vittorio's eyes. If he seated them, he admitted he had been wrong. If he refused again, he risked losing Lorenzo Conti. But pride rarely makes intelligent decisions. Signor Conti, Vittorio said, it is always a pleasure to have you. But I already explained to Signor Spencer that we maintain certain standards regarding attire. That has not changed. He said it softly. But in an elegant restaurant, even a controlled voice can carry. The hush spread outward through the room. Lorenzo stared at him. You're refusing to serve Bud Spencer in front of me for the 2nd time because of what he is wearing. My standards apply to everyone equally, Vittorio replied. Equally? Lorenzo repeated. Then he turned toward the room. I want everyone here to hear this, he said. I have brought clients to this restaurant for years. Today the owner has refused to serve my friend twice because he is wearing jeans and a t-shirt. The room stirred. Heads turned. Phones appeared. A woman near the center of the dining room lowered her wine glass and said, "That man has given more joy to ordinary people than most of us could repay in a lifetime. And you're saying he can't sit down for lunch because of his clothes." Another man stood. "If Bud Spencer isn't welcome here, neither am I. Bring me the bill." Bud. Sweat appeared at Vittorio's temples. His hand tightened against the podium until his knuckles paled. He looked around and saw something he had never seen directed at him inside his own restaurant. Not loud anger, but quiet disappointment. The kind that cuts deeper because it assumes you should have known better. Through all of it, Bud had not raised his voice. He had not pointed. He had only returned, asked for a table, and let Vittorio reveal himself. Then Bud spoke. "Signor De Luca," he said, "I respect that this is your restaurant. But if I were not Bud Spencer, if I were just an ordinary man in jeans, would you have turned me away just the same?" Vittorio opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "I think you would have," Bud said gently. "And I think you know. That isn't right." 40 people watched a large man in a wrinkled shirt speak with more dignity than the owner of the restaurant. Vittorio could not answer. He turned, walked through the kitchen door, and disappeared. Lorenzo looked at Bud. "What do you want to do?" Bud pulled out a chair and sat down. "Give him a few minutes." "You want to wait? I didn't come back to humiliate him," Bud said. "Anyone can see he's carrying something." So they waited. Bud drank water, spoke quietly to his friends, gave the man space. After about 10 minutes, Bud stood up. "Where are you going?" Lorenzo asked. "To talk to him," Bud said. "Just the two of us." He walked through the kitchen, down a narrow corridor scented with garlic, steam, and dish soap, to a cramped office at the end. Vittorio sat behind a cluttered desk with his head in his hands. On the desk stood a framed photograph of him and his wife, Sophia, in front of the original Bellacosta years earlier. 8 tables, paper napkins, both of them smiling with the hunger and hope of people building something real. Bud knocked softly against the doorframe. Vittorio looked up. His eyes were red. He did not look furious now. He looked tired. More tired than a man should look. "May I sit?" Bud asked. Vittorio did not answer, so Bud pulled over a folding chair and placed it opposite the desk. The noise of the kitchen passed faintly through the wall. Pans, orders, the hiss of something on the stove. "I didn't come back to destroy your day," Bud said. "What happened out there was not about a dress code. We both know that. So what is this really about?" And Vittorio told him about Elena Marconi, about the year of careful pursuit, about the call that ended it, about the charity event, about watching a man in a simple shirt speak to children and, without even knowing it, change the direction of millions of euros, about 4 years of resenting someone who never knew he existed. Bud listened without interrupting. Then Vittorio said the harder thing. "You're not the first person I've turned away," he admitted. "There were dozens before you. Anyone who didn't look the part. I told myself I was protecting the restaurant, but really, I was protecting my vanity." He paused. "I grew up with nothing. I know what it feels like to enter a room and have people decide you do not belong. I built this place so I would never feel that again. And somewhere along the way, I became the one doing it to other people. Every person I sent away was another brick in a wall between me and where I came from." A timer rang out from the kitchen. "The truth," Vittorio said, his voice breaking now, "is that I was never really angry with you. I was afraid of you. You have fame, respect, success, and you still walk around like a man who owes nothing to appearances. People love you for it because it feels honest. I have spent my whole life performing, and no one has ever loved me for that. Bud let the silence stay a while before he answered. Vittorio, I know what it is to fear that you are not enough. I've had years of loss. Years when work felt uncertain. Years when you sit alone with your thoughts and wonder whether any of it means what people say it does. That fear that no matter what you build, it still won't fill the empty place inside you. I understand that. Then he leaned back slightly. But let me ask you something. That elderly man in the worn jacket, the one who came here on his birthday, how do you think he felt when he walked back out that door? What do you think that did to his day? To his memory of that day? Vittorio closed his eyes. You built something real here, Bud said. 18 years. I've heard people say this is one of the best restaurants in Rome. But what is a restaurant, really? What is it supposed to be? Vittorio opened his eyes and looked at the old photograph of himself and Sofia outside the original storefront. He stared at it for a long time. A place where people feel welcome, he said at last, almost under his breath. Bud nodded. That's what I think too. He stood, placed a steady hand on Vittorio's shoulder, and said, I'm not asking you for a free meal. I'm not asking you to grovel. Just walk back out there and be the man in that photograph. The one who opened a restaurant because he wanted to feed people. Start there. He gave the shoulder a gentle pat. And lunch, he added. I'm paying full price. I don't need anyone in debt to me. Then he returned to the dining room, sat back down, and ordered nothing until Vittorio was ready. What did you say to him? Lorenzo asked. The truth, Bud replied. Usually, that's enough. 10 minutes later, the kitchen door opened. Vittorio stepped back into the dining room. He had washed his face. His hair was in place, though softer now, less severe. His hands were not completely steady, but he stood upright. The room went silent again, though now the silence felt different. Waiting, listening, he walked to the table and took a breath. Signor Spencer, he said, I owe you an apology. Not because you are famous, not because of who you know, because what I did was wrong. I judged you by your clothes and refused to serve you twice. There is no excuse for that. He paused. I have spent a long time believing the worth of this restaurant depended on keeping certain people outside its doors. I was wrong. What you said to me back there, I heard every word. Bud looked up and smiled, warm and easy, that slightly crooked smile people loved. That's all I needed, he said. Someone began to clap. Then another person. It spread through the room, not loud and theatrical, but sincere. Max wiped his eyes quickly with the back of his hand and pretended he had not. Vittorio went into the kitchen and cooked the meal himself, not because anyone required it, but because cooking was the only language he trusted when words fell short. The bread came out warm. The olive oil tasted like care. Every plate carried the feeling that someone had finally remembered what feeding people is meant to mean. Bud paid the full bill. He left Max a tip far beyond what anyone would have expected. The young waiter stared at the receipt. Thank you, he said quietly. Bud met his eyes. You were put in a bad position by someone else's choice, and you handled it with grace. Remember that. Then they left. And the late afternoon sun cast gold through the trees as Bud held the door for his friends, just as he had done the first time. That night, a retired schoolteacher named Lucia, who had been dining a few tables away, wrote a post on Facebook about what she had seen. She was not trying to attract attention. She was trying to understand why what she had witnessed affected her so strongly. By morning, the post had spread. Then it spread again. Local newspapers picked it up. Then national ones. Within a week, the story had traveled across Italy. The weeks that followed nearly broke Vittorio. Revenue dropped hard. Long-time clients vanished. No one argued with him. They simply stopped coming. That silence was worse than outrage, because silence leaves you with no defense. 3 weeks after the incident, Vittorio sat in his kitchen in the dark. Sophia found him there. "I think we should sell," he told her. "Start over somewhere no one knows us." She sat across from him and said nothing for a long time. "Running is easy," she said at last. "Changing is hard. That man gave you a chance most people never receive. Don't waste it." So he did not sell. He did not run. He changed. He removed the unwritten dress code completely. He gathered his staff and told them that everyone who walked through the door would be seated. No exceptions. Max later said it was the first time he had ever heard Vittorio speak without sounding like he was performing a version of himself. Then Vittorio created Community Night. On the first Saturday of every month, Bellacosta opened its doors to families who could never normally afford to dine there. Shelters, church groups, neighborhood centers. And it was not a reduced menu or a symbolic gesture. It was the real menu, the full service. The same plates, the same linen, the same care. If welcome meant anything, it had to be complete. The first evening was awkward. Vittorio wanted to hide in his office. Instead, he stayed. He pulled out chairs, filled water glasses, walked bread to the tables himself. By the third month, children were running to their favorite seats. Staff members volunteered to work Saturdays. A shy young man in a hooded sweatshirt who had barely lifted his eyes the first time he came returned every month. One evening, over a plate of risotto, he told Vittorio that Community Night was the only night all month when he felt like a real person. That sentence stayed with Vittorio longer than any review or business award ever had. He began partnering with reintegration programs. He hired people from neglected neighborhoods. By the front door, he placed a small wooden sign that read, "Everyone is welcome here. Every person has value." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Inspired by a lesson I learned the hard way." The story that had once damaged Bellacosta now brought in new people. Families who had always assumed it was not a place for people like them began to come, because now the door said otherwise. Revenue recovered. Then it exceeded what it had once been. Not because the restaurant became known as the place that insulted Bud Spencer, but because it became known as the place that changed afterward. Max left 2 years later and opened a small restaurant in Naples. 12 tables. 1 rule. On every new hire's first day, he told them the same thing. Every guest is treated the same, whether they arrive in a luxury car or on foot. Years later, in a magazine interview, Max said, "That day changed my life." Bud could have destroyed Vittorio with one phone call. Instead, he sat in a back office, listened, and gave a man the chance to become better. That is real power. Not the kind that crushes, the kind that rebuilds. He smiled when he said it. I still have the receipt he left me framed. Not because of the amount, because I was the one who told him he wasn't welcome, and he still treated me with dignity. That receipt reminds me every day that the truest measure of a person is how they treat someone who has no power over them. Bud Spencer never made the story about himself. Years later, when a journalist asked him about it, he brushed it aside. "It was never really about me," he said. "I was just a man in jeans looking for lunch. The real story is about all the people who are treated that way every day and have no one to call. If it makes someone think twice before judging a stranger, then maybe it mattered." 3 years later, Elena Marconi visited Bellacosta during Community Night. She sat beside a family of 5 and watched Vittorio carry bread to their table with his own hands. Afterward, she wrote, "I have invested in many businesses, but I have rarely seen a return like the one born from a single afternoon. Not financial, human. Vittorio De Luca is not the man I once refused. He became better, and sometimes that is the most extraordinary transformation a person can make." Vittorio ran Bellacosta for 12 more years. He kept Community Night alive every month, even during renovations, when folding tables had to be set up outside. He mentored young cooks. Once a year, he spoke at a local school about second chances. At 68, he retired and handed the restaurant to Carmen, a woman who had started in the kitchen through one of his community programs and worked her way up to general manager. The wooden sign by the door remained. Carmen made sure of it. Vittorio moved with Sofia to a quieter part of the city. In the evenings, they cooked simple meals together. The same kind of food he had grown up eating, the sort he had once pretended was beneath him. One night, he told Sofia that those dinners at home, pasta with jarred sauce and bread from the corner shop, were the best meals of his life. She laughed and said she was glad it had only taken him 60-something years to understand that. He died at 73, with Sofia beside him. In his final interview, a young journalist asked him about the Bud Spencer incident. "The worst day of my life," Vittorio said, "and the best. The worst because it showed everyone who I had become. The best because someone showed me it was not too late to become someone else." "Do you have regrets?" "Thousands," he said. "Every person I ever made feel small. Every person I made feel unwelcome. I cannot undo any of that. All I could do was spend the years afterward trying. Whether I did enough is not for me to decide, but I tried." Then he paused and said, "Do you know what I think about most? Community. Night. Watching people step into a place they never imagined was for them, and seeing their faces when they realized they truly belonged. Not the Rolex, not the wine cellar. That is what gave the restaurant its value. I have heard many stories like this, but this one stays with me for a different reason. Not because the name at the center of it is famous, but because of what it reveals. Bud Spencer had every reason to destroy that restaurant publicly, but he did not. Vittorio had every reason to retreat behind pride and blame the world. But in the end, he did not. And Max, a young waiter trapped in a mess he did not create, witnessed it all and carried the lesson for the rest of his life. I do not know how I would have responded in Bud's place. I would like to think I would have shown the same patience, the same restraint, the same mercy, but I cannot say for certain. Most of us cannot. Maybe that is exactly why the story matters. This story is fictional, inspired by Bud Spencer's widely admired image as a warm, generous, deeply human man. But the kind of moment it describes happens far more often than people like to admit. If it stayed with you, share what it left you thinking about. Pass it on to someone who may need it. And remember, sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who chooses not to humiliate, but to restore. This story is not true and is entirely a work of fiction, but the lesson inside it is real. Every day, people are judged for how they look, where they come from, or whether they seem important enough to deserve kindness. That part is not invented. The reminder at the heart of this story is simple but powerful. Dignity should never be reserved for the privileged, and respect should never depend on status. Fiction can be imagined, but the truth it reveals about pride, grace, and the way we treat others is something we face in real life every single day.